I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to reach back through the decades and recall a very specific, comforting scent from your childhood. Perhaps it is the unmistakable smell of a damp woolen coat drying near a glowing coal stove, or the sweet aroma of freshly ground filter coffee echoing through a quiet, drafty hallway. Welcome back to the 1960s in the Netherlands. Today we are going on a gentle, deeply nostalgic journey to rediscover 20 incredible details of Dutch daily life that we have somehow left behind in the march of time. We are going to remember the textures, the sounds, and the unwritten rules that shaped our youth. And make sure you stay with me until the very end, because the final memory we will share is perhaps the most touching, a beautiful, vanished ritual of true human connection that will absolutely bring a tear to your eye and a smile to your heart. Before we dive into these precious memories, let us take a moment to remember how time itself felt back then. In the 1960s and 70s, time flowed at a completely different pace. It was slower, more deliberate, and delightfully unhurried. We did not have the entire world rushing at us through glowing screens in our pockets. Instead, we knew the profound value of waiting. We waited for a handwritten letter to arrive in the mail. We waited all week for our favorite radio program to broadcast, and we waited for the changing of the seasons. There is a modern myth that because we lack today's advanced technology, our lives were somehow poorer or less connected. But you and I know the absolute truth. Life back then was infinitely richer in sincerity, in patience, and in genuine face-to-face human contact. We had less, but we felt more. We lived closely with our neighbors, our doors were often left unlocked, and our happiness was built on a foundation of simple, shared moments. Now, let us gently open the door to the past and step back into that beautifully simple world. Let us begin with the crisp early mornings and the rhythmic soundtrack of the milkman, or the Melkboer. Long before the giant impersonal supermarkets took over our lives, the neighborhood milkman was a vital thread in the social fabric of our streets. Do you remember the sound of his arrival? It was the unmistakable metallic clinking of glass bottles knocking together in metal crates, accompanied by the low, steady hum of his electric cart moving slowly from house to house. Those heavy glass bottles felt so cold and substantial in your hands. You had to press down and carefully peel back the colored foil cap to get to the rich, creamy milk inside. The milkman was not just a delivery driver, he was a friend to the family. He knew every customer by name. He knew exactly how many bottles of whole milk, buttermilk, or yogurt your mother needed without even asking. He was the bearer of local news, exchanging a few kind words and some neighborhood gossip with the housewives who stood in their doorways wrapping their cardigans tightly against the morning chill. Losing the milkman meant losing a daily moment of community. Now, let us bring back the memory of winter and the absolute heart of the Dutch home, the coal stove or the kolenkachel. In the 1960s, central heating was a rare luxury. Instead, the entire life of the family revolved around this single, heavy, cast-iron beast sitting proudly in the living room. Do you remember the smell? It was a distinct, slightly sulfuric scent of burning coal and warm iron that permeated the whole house. The ritual began with the arrival of the coal merchant, the kolenboer, a strong man with a face permanently smudged with black dust, carrying incredibly heavy sacks on his back to dump into the bunker. Keeping that stove burning was a true art form. It required constant attention, adjusting the drafts and shaking down the ashes. On cold winter evenings, the whole family would huddle as close to the stove as possible, roasting their fronts while their backs remained chilly. And when it was time to go to bed, you had to leave that warm sanctuary and run up the freezing stairs, diving under heavy woolen blankets, while beautiful intricate ice crystals formed on the inside of the single-pane bedroom windows. Next, let us talk about the ritual of incredible patience and frugality that defined the Dutch household, saving trading stamps, or zegeltjes plakken. Today, loyalty programs are just invisible digital points on a plastic card. But back then, it was a deeply tactile, communal activity. Every time your mother went to the Albert Heijn or the local grocery store, she would receive these tiny, colorful stamps based on how much money she spent. The ritual happened at the kitchen table. Do you remember the distinct, slightly bitter taste of the glue on the back of those stamps? We would sit there as children, carefully licking each stamp and meticulously pasting it into the designated booklets. It had to be done perfectly straight. When a booklet was finally full, it represented real, tangible wealth. It was a triumph of the famous Dutch thriftiness. Those full booklets could be exchanged for cash or beautiful household items that the family could otherwise not afford. It taught us the value of saving, the reward of patience, and the joy of contributing to the family economy, one tiny, licked stamp at a time. And speaking of the kitchen table, we absolutely must remember the strict, legendary rule of the Dutch cookie tin, the koektrommel. This is a memory that defines our culture perfectly. When visitors came over, or when it was time for a cup of tea in the late afternoon, the beautifully decorated metal cookie tin would be brought out from the cupboard. Do you remember the sound of the tight lid popping off? Inside, nestled in layers of crinkly paper, were delicious treats, perhaps a Maria biscuit, a crunchy crackling, or a spiced speculoos. The rule was universal and unbreakable. You were offered exactly one cookie. You would carefully make your choice, and the very second you took your single biscuit, the lid was firmly pressed back onto the tin and it was whisked away. To modern eyes, this might seem incredibly stingy, but we know it was not about being cheap. It was a profound lesson in moderation. It taught us to deeply appreciate that one single treat, to savor every bite alongside our hot tea, rather than mindlessly consuming out of greed. It was a beautiful, disciplined ritual of hospitality. Now let us shift our attention to the airwaves and the thrilling sound of youth rebellion. If you were a teenager in the 1960s, your lifeline to the modern world was the transistor radio, and specifically the pirate radio stations broadcasting from ships in the North Sea. The most famous, of course, was Radio Veronica. Do you remember sneaking your small plastic radio into bed, pressing the scratchy speaker tight against your ear and hiding it under the blankets so your parents would not hear? The signal would fade in and out, mixing with the crackle of static, but that only made it more exciting. Those offshore DJs played the beat music that the state broadcasters absolutely refused to touch. They played the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and local Dutch bands that were changing the culture. Listening to those broadcasts felt like being part of a secret, exciting club. It was the sound of freedom, the sound of a generation breaking away from the stiff traditions of the past, all transmitted through the dark, salty air from a rusty boat bobbing in international waters. Let us take a walk outside and remember the absolute magic of a traditional Queen's Day, Koninginnedag, celebrated on the 30th of April. Long before it became a massive, commercialized festival of electronic music, this day belonged to the neighborhoods and the children. The streets would be decorated with simple orange paper flags fluttering in the crisp spring breeze. The true joy was found in the traditional, delightfully simple street games. Do you remember the absolute hilarity of koekhappen? A delicious piece of spiced cake, usually on the bite cook, was tied to a string and dangled above your head. You were blindfolded, your hands were tied behind your back, and you had to try to bite the swinging cake while your neighbors and friends cheered and laughed. There was seg racing, egg and spoon races, and a feeling of complete, innocent joy. The adults would stand around chatting, sharing a bitterballen or a glass of Jenever, while the children ran free until they were exhausted. It was a day where the entire country felt like one big, welcoming, brightly colored village. Let us return indoors and look at the corner of the living room where a magical, heavy piece of furniture stood. The early television sets of the 1960s. This was not a flat, invisible screen. It was a massive wooden cabinet that commanded respect, often with doors that could be closed when it was not in use. We only had one or two channels, broadcasting in glorious, fuzzy black and white. Because televisions were still expensive, it was common for the whole street to gather in the living room of the one family lucky enough to own a set. Do you remember staring at the test card, the test build, just waiting with immense anticipation for the broadcast to begin? And when it did, the entire nation shared the exact same cultural moments. On Wednesday afternoons, the children were captivated by Pippo the Clown. And on Saturday evenings, the whole family would roar with laughter at the antics of Zwiebertje and the strict Veldwachter. Because there were so few choices, television unified us. The next morning at school or at the bakery, absolutely everyone was talking about the exact same show. Now, let us remember a very specific, greasy and wonderful Friday evening treat. Going to the local snack bar to get French fries, or as we call them, frites. Back then, the snack bar was a small, brightly lit haven, smelling intensely of hot frying fat and savory spices. The ritual of eating those fries was completely different from today. They did not come in sterile cardboard boxes. They were scooped generously into a large, white paper cone, a punzak. The hot oil would slowly seep through the paper, making it transparent at the bottom. The owner would slather a thick, generous dollop of creamy, sweet mayonnaise right on top. And the best part? You ate them using a tiny, two-pronged wooden fork. Do you remember how that little wooden fork would always add a slight, earthy taste of wood to the salty, golden fries? Walking home in the dark, clutching that warm paper cone to your chest, sharing the hot fries with your siblings. It was the ultimate, inexpensive luxury that made the end of the school week feel incredibly special. Let us feel the biting cold of a true Dutch winter and remember the absolute magic of natural ice skating. Schaatsen op natuurijs. In those days, the winters felt colder, and the canals and flooded meadows froze solid much more often. The moment the ice was declared thick enough, a fever swept over the entire country. Do you remember the wooden skates, the traditional doorloppers? They did not have comfortable padded boots attached. Instead, you had to tie these wooden blocks with long steel blades directly onto your own leather shoes, using thick, cold, wet leather straps. Your fingers would turn numb just trying to get the knots tight enough. But once you were on the ice, all the pain vanished. The rhythmic scraping sound of hundreds of blades gliding over the dark, natural ice is a sound you never forget. Strangers would skate together in a long line, hands clasped behind their backs. And when the sun began to set and your toes were completely frozen, you would warm up with a steaming thick cup of split pea soup, earthen soup, sold from a small wooden stall on the frozen canal. Now, breathe in deeply and try to recall a scent that instantly brings back memories of your grandmother. It is the sharp, incredibly clean, citrus scent of eau de cologne, most famously the brand 4711. This was not just the perfume, it was a universal remedy, a true household staple in the 1960s. Do you remember the heavy, beautifully textured glass bottle with its blue and gold label sitting on the dressing table? The ritual was deeply comforting. If you fell and scraped your knee, if you felt a bit dizzy, or if you simply needed to freshen up on a warm summer day, your grandmother would take a crisp, freshly ironed white linen handkerchief and sprinkle a few generous drops of eau de cologne onto it. She would dab it gently on your forehead or your wrists. The alcohol would evaporate quickly, leaving a cooling sensation and that bright, medicinal lemon fragrance. It was the scent of care, the scent of comfort, and the undeniable fragrance of an older, wiser generation wrapping you in their love. Let us step back out onto the street and listen for a very specific sound that replaced the milkman in the late 60s and 70s. It was the heavy, rattling engine of the mobile grocery store, the SRV wagon. This was a miraculous invention for the busy housewife. It was a small, motorized bus that drove right into the heart of the neighborhood, acting as a complete, running supermarket. Do you remember stepping up into that small, brightly lit vehicle? The smell inside was an incredible, unique mixture. It smelled of freshly baked bread, strong laundry detergent, ripe fruit, and the exhaust fumes of the engine all at once. The aisles were incredibly narrow, so you had to squeeze past your neighbors to grab a bag of sugar or a tin of soup. The driver sat at the front, doubling as the cashier, taking your paper guilders and heavy silver coins from a metal money box. The SRV wagon was more than just convenience. It was a moving community center, a place where the women of the street would gather, catch up on the day's events, and feel a sense of independence. And speaking of shopping, we must remember the absolute grandeur of going to the big city center on a Saturday to visit the legendary department store Vroom and Driesman, affectionately known as V&D. For those growing up in smaller towns, stepping into a V&D was like stepping into the future. The sheer scale of the building was breathtaking. Do you remember the absolute thrill of riding the escalator for the first time? It was an event in itself. But the true peak of the experience was going all the way up to the top floor to visit the restaurant La Place. It was a cafeteria-style setup that felt incredibly chic and modern. You would take a plastic tray and slide it along the metal rails, choosing a slice of cake, a fresh sandwich, or a cup of hot chocolate. Sitting by the large windows, looking out over the bustling city streets while eating your treat made you feel incredibly sophisticated. The loss of V&D a few years ago was not just the loss of a store, it was the loss of a foundational childhood memory for an entire generation of Dutch people. Now let us talk about how we communicated long before instant messaging and smartphones. I want you to remember the imposing presence of the traditional landline telephone, the vaste telephone. In the 1960s, it was often a heavy, black bakelite machine sitting proudly on a small table in the hallway. Making a call was a physical, deliberate act. Do you remember the resistance of the rotary dial? You had to place your finger in the hole, pull the dial all the way around to the metal stopper, and listen to that satisfying clicking sound as it spun back into place. If you messed up the very last digit, you had to hang up and start the entire laborious process all over again. And we must not forget the shared party lines. Sometimes, when you picked up the heavy receiver, you could hear your neighbors talking or just hear them breathing on the other end of the line. Calls were expensive, so you had to speak quickly and get straight to the point. The telephone was a tool for important news, not for idle chatter, making every ring of the bell a moment of high suspense. Let us remember the sounds and smells of the legendary Dutch spring cleaning. If you walked down a residential street on a sunny spring morning, the air would be filled with a loud, rhythmic, explosive sound, echoing of the brick houses. Whack, whack, whack! It was the sound of the mattenkopper, the traditional rattan carpet beater. Housewives would drag their heavy, woolen rugs out into the garden or drape them over the balcony railing. Do you remember watching the incredible clouds of dust explode into the air, catching the bright spring sunlight with every strike of the woven wooden paddle? It was hard, physical labor, but it was done with immense pride. The Dutch have always valued a spotless home. The windows would be thrown wide open to let the fresh air in, the floors would be scrubbed until they shone, and the entire house would smell intensely of green soap, or groene zeep, and floor wax. That exhausting ritual brought a sense of renewal, a feeling that winter was truly banished and the home was pure and clean again. Now, let us feel the weight of real money in our hands and mourn the loss of one of the most beautiful currencies in the world, the Dutch guilder, the gulden. Before the euro came and homogenized everything, our money was a vibrant work of art. Do you remember the substantial, heavy feel of the silver coins in your pocket? The small dubbeltje, the kwartje, and the incredibly satisfying weight of a rijksdaalder. But the paper money was where the true magic lay. The brilliant, colorful notes designed by Ootje Oxenaar were world famous. Think of the bright green 5 guilder note or the incredibly beautiful sunflower on the 50 guilder note and the snipebird on the 100. Handing over a crisp, colorful banknote felt like a meaningful transaction. You understood the value of every single cent because you could feel it, fold it, and count it physically on the counter. Today, money is just an invisible digital flash on a plastic terminal. We lost not just our currency, but the tangible, tactile poetry of holding the beautiful Dutch guilder in our hands. Let us think back to our wardrobes and the incredibly strict division between the clothes we wore for playing outside and our Sunday best, zondagse kleding. In the 1960s, there was a profound sense of occasion that we have completely lost today in our era of constant casual wear. During the week, you wore practical, sturdy clothes that could handle a scraped knee or a tear from climbing trees. But Sunday was entirely different. Do you remember the ritual of being scrubbed clean on Saturday night, ready for Sunday morning? The Sunday clothes were often stiff, scratchy, and deeply uncomfortable. The boys wore miniature suits with tight collars that dug into their necks, and the girls wore ruffled dresses with pristine white knee socks and shiny patent leather shoes that pinched their toes. You were absolutely forbidden from playing rough or getting dirty. You had to sit straight, walk properly to church, or sit quietly in the living room while visiting grandparents. Though it was uncomfortable, that stiff clothing taught us a deep physical respect for the sacredness of the day and the importance of family traditions. Now, we must talk about the most iconic, joyful and utterly Dutch morning ritual in existence. Breakfast with chocolate sprinkles, or hagelslag. While other countries were eating eggs or boring porridge, we were boldly starting our day with chocolate. But it is the ritual of preparation that is so deeply nostalgic. Do you remember taking a soft, white slice of bread? The crucial step was the butter. You had to use real butter or a thick layer of margarine, and you had to spread it meticulously, all the way to the very edges of the crust. If you missed the spot, disaster would strike and the sprinkles would bounce right off onto your plate. Then came the glorious moment of shaking the rectangular cardboard box. The sound of thousands of tiny chocolate cylinders cascading onto the buttered bread is the soundtrack of our childhood. You would press them down slightly with your knife to secure them, fold the bread in half and take that first incredible crunchy sweet bite. It was a simple, unapologetic joy that made growing up in the Netherlands uniquely wonderful. Let us shift gears and remember the ultimate symbol of teenage freedom and rebellion in the late 60s and 70s. The mopeds, or brommers. Before everyone had a car, the street corners belonged to the local youth and their prized possessions. The boys would spend all their hard-earned money from weekend jobs to buy a Zundab, a Kreidler or a Puch. Do you remember the incredibly distinct, sweet and smoky smell of the two-stroke engine oil lingering in the neighborhood air? The boys would spend hours tuning their engines, trying to make them go just a little bit faster, polishing the chrome until it gleamed. They wore heavy leather jackets, looking incredibly tough. And if you were a girl, the ultimate romantic gesture was being invited to ride on the back. But you did not sit astride. You sat elegantly sideways, holding on tight to the boy's leather jacket as you roared down the polder roads. The brommer was not just a vehicle. It was an escape from the watchful eyes of parents, a loud, fast and beautiful declaration of independence. Let us return to the warmth of the kitchen and listen for a sound that meant absolute comfort and safety. The whistling kettle, the fluid kettle. Long before instant hot water taps and electric kettles, boiling water was an event that demanded your attention. Do you remember the heavy, often brightly colored enamel kettle sitting on the gas stove? You would turn the knob, hear the click of the igniter, and watch the blue ring of fire flare up beneath the metal base. Then you had to wait. As the water heated, it would start with a low, gentle rumble. Slowly, a tiny hiss would emerge from the spout, building and building, until it became a loud, frantic, urgent whistle that echoed through the entire house. It demanded that you drop whatever you were doing and stand to it. The pouring was a slow, meditative process, usually over a plastic filter cone filled with finely ground Douwe Egberts coffee. The glorious, rich aroma of the coffee blooming as the boiling water hit the grounds meant that the moment of rest, a moment of peace, was finally here. And finally, we arrive at the most beautiful, touching and completely lost ritual of them all. The unannounced visit, het onverwachts bezoek. Today we live in a world where we must send 3 text messages just to ask if it is okay to call someone on the phone. But back then, our doors and our lives were truly open. Do you remember the sudden unexpected ringing of the doorbell on a random Tuesday evening? You would open the door and there stood an aunt, a neighbor or an old friend simply because they were in the neighborhood and felt like seeing you. There was a brief moment of wonderful, chaotic scrambling. Your mother would rush to put the whistling kettle on the stove, the famous cookie tin would be retrieved from the cupboard, and an extra chair was pulled up to the table. There was no need for a perfectly curated house or a prepared speech. It was raw, genuine, unfiltered human connection. We welcomed people into our messy, beautiful lives without hesitation. We sat, we drank our filter coffee, we ate our single cookie, and we talked for hours. We were truly deeply present for one another. As we gently closed the door on our journey through the 1960s, 70s and 80s, a profound realization washes over us. When we look back at the glass-milled bottles, the whistling kettles, the beautiful paper gilders and the heavy coal stoves, we realize that it is not really the physical objects we are mourning. What we truly miss is the way time felt back then. We miss the slow, deliberate pace of our days. We miss the innocence of our youth. And most importantly, we miss that deep, unshakable sense of connection we had with our neighbors and our families. We lived closer together, we shared more, and we found immense joy in the simplest of rituals. If this gentle walk down memory lane has warmed your heart today, please do me a kind favor. Hit that subscribe button and leave a like on this video, so we can continue to preserve these beautiful histories together. And now, I would love to hear from you. Which of these 20 memories brought a tear to your eye? Or perhaps made you smile the most? And what special, forgotten detail of your own childhood would you add to this list? Please, pour yourself a warm cup of tea, grab a single cookie, and share your beautiful personal story in the comments below. Until next time, take care of yourself and never forget the magic of our past.